On today's episode, we are speaking to Nick Dunmur, the business and legal advisor for the Association of Photographers. We're talking about terms, contracts, cost of business, all that really sexy stuff. Even if you're a seasoned pro needing a refresh or someone who's just getting into it, this is a super useful chat and we really appreciate Nick coming to chat with us. We hope you enjoy.
Boom, we're on.
We are on. Hello, mate. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. Sat in the studio, staring up at the skylight that tells me it's miserable outside and autumn has finally arrived. It's
grim. There's no other word for it. It is absolutely. I looked out the window this morning and realised I hadn't cleaned my gutters and they were all overflowing because of the rain. And I thought, you know what? 2020, it's just been such a great year so far. The fact that I've now completely forgotten to do my gutters just completely fits into the narrative of the entire.
Yeah, it's not been a great week for news in general, and general optimism of the situation. But let's not dwell on that too much.
Tell you what, though, let's talk about weather and gear because we all work outside from time to time.
What a segue! What a segue!
What a segue!
Wow,
right here.
What have you bought now?
Well, no, I was just hoping you would be like, oh yeah, no, of course, I shoot outside all the time, and then you'd pick up the segue. But no, apparently, no. I'll continue.
I'm not taking the bait.
You're not taking the bait. God damn.
No, not this week.
What? Not this week. Fool me once. No, because I remember on your kit bag walkthrough. Am I thinking about your kit bag walkthrough, which you should watch on YouTube? It has.
Do you mean you've been watching other people's kit bag walkthroughs?
Always, forever. Sorry, I hate to be that guy, but I'm afraid me and your gear walkthrough video, we're not exclusive anymore. I've been seeing on you video.
I've been seeing other videos. Okay, so what have you been watching?
What have I been watching? I don't know.
Yeah, what is it?
You thought it was your video that you had some waterproofing for in your kit bag.
Oh, like no, I do have some very basic stuff that's kind of emergency. Yeah.
So this whole segue that I've been desperately trying to get you to kind of eke out some info, you've actually already given away. You just forgot about it.
Well, I mean, they're pretty dull bits of kit. They're basically glorified bags and bits of string, but they are quite useful to have in your bag for when it is raining, because not only can they go over your camera, they can go over a flash head or whatever. But in terms of sexiness, they are a 1 out of 10.
Ladies and gentlemen, blood out of a stone. There we go.
I can't even remember who makes them. Are they Optec? I think
Probably
it might be Optec.
Optec are one of those that just make all sorts of weird bits of kit. Like I never want a strap that has suspension built into it with rubber dots on it, but Optec build it.
Yeah, so, well, I actually own one of those straps, and it sits on my Polaroid 600 SE, which is a beast of a camera. So
that is a large camera.
But it is weird when you use it because it feels like you're wearing like a camera with suspension, because it kind of bounces softly at your side.
Does it help you take better pictures? I don't know. Is it more comfortable? My local camera has them, and every time I go in, they go, "You should try one."
I do actually think it's a very comfortable strap, but I honestly have never really used it with a camera, like a normal camera. So
was with the novelty cameras, is it?
Yeah, I got it, and then it was like, okay, I'm not going to use that on my. It's too big to use on my like day-to-day cameras, so it goes in a drawer. And then you know what it's like. You get something, and you're like, oh, I need a camera strap. Oh, I go to the camera strap drawer. Go to the camera.
I mean, I'm not quite that flush. I only have one set of camera straps. So
well, See, I end up with all this crap. You've been quite good at kind of clearing out your various kind of hoarding.
I've been very good at it. Very good. Actually, before we came on air, we were talking about the pros and cons of eBaying old kit. And, you're currently dealing with a con of it. And I'm currently dealing with no pros because I've not sold anything in a while. Actually, I've got a big eBay sale coming right up. But by the time this has come out, everything will have gone. So I don't feel so bad about shamelessly trying to plug a previous eBay sale. But
You're
yeah,
like
no,
you're like the Mary Kondo of the camera world.
do you know what? I will take that. Does it give me joy? Does it bring me joy? Yes, absolutely. I'll keep it. Does it
I
bring me
mean,
joy? No, I'll probably end up keeping it because photographers are hoarders, and we all have boxes and boxes of tat and crap that just I don't know. Just I don't know about you,
sounds
but
like
for
a
me,
great name for a brand.
tat and crap. I was going to call my building firm because the work's been a bit slow because of obviously COVID, and I thought I was going to start a building firm called Bodge It and Fix It. But now actually, tat and crap could be quite a viable option.
That sounds a
If
bit like my my sideline in I thought about starting like a side photography business called Funnel Vision.
Funnel Vision, a funnel
I've even got a Funnel Vision T-shirt in the Chuckle Vision font that an art director once had made up for me at a rap party.
amazing.
But it was off-putting every time I went to take a picture, and someone would start doing the Funnel Vision kind of soundtrack in the background.
Fair enough. Quickly put a shirt over that. Oh dear. But yeah, going back to eBay, we've all got just boxes. You've got a studio space, but your kit, do you have just? Does that mean if you've got two different places, does that mean you have two different boxes of crap?
Oh, at least, yeah. I mean, so
listeners, is that I behind me am berating Greg for having more and more boxes of kit, but I have got 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24 boxes of crap in my office. Unbelievable. Never actually counted them before. That's really embarrassing. Right.
So I have, I have a whole load of crap at home on various shelves, wall to ceiling, and then in the studio we have a couple of things. We have a unit called the Beast, which is appropriately named because it's impossible to move the bloody thing, and that's full of kit. And then we have an industrial shelving unit of 6 shelves made out of like a whole scaffolding rig, which is also full of kit. Yeah, it's not all mine, but
sure.
I promise.
Just 5 shelves out of the 6 are yours.
Anyway,
terrible.
Moving on. We have we're very lucky today. We've got Nick Dunmur from the AOP, and it's a pretty awesome episode, this one. I think it's going to be really useful for people who have got questions about usage and licensing and contracts. That may sound dull, but Nick does a very good job of making that all interesting and accessible. There's loads of really good links actually that he mentions. So do make sure you check out the show notes because there's a couple of things that he mentioned that I was furiously Googling after we'd finished chatting to him.
Doing.
Yeah, that was a tapping.
If I'm honest, mate, I thought
you just thought I was ignoring you.
No, not quite. But yeah, go on.
I don't even know where you're going with that.
Oh dear, it's been a very, very long week, and we're only on Wednesday.
God. Yeah, lower the tone, Barnes.
Sorry, that would be me. I don't even lower the tone; it just crashes through the floor. But yeah, Nick is. It was a fascinating chat with Nick. Super interesting. Let's face it, contracts are a pain in the ass, but they're always good to kind of get a refresher, go back and just get a clarity on the terms and everything like that. It's becoming more and more, it was always a massive part of the job, but it's now becoming more and more, something you need to kind of watch out for. So yeah, Nick very kindly talks us through it and talks about what the AOP is and does. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Little introduction to the AOP for those who aren't kind of familiar with it. And actually there's loads of aspects. I mean, we're both members of the AOP, I believe. And there are aspects of it that they do that I wasn't even aware of. So even if you feel like you know stuff, it's still worth a listen for that. But yeah, also he talks through all the various kind of aspects of it, the various membership levels and stuff. So, if you're a student or if you're just starting out, there's different kind of things that might suit you. Yeah, I thought it was a really good episode, and it was lovely to have Nick on, actually. He's a really lovely guy.
Bloody nice chap.
Bloody nice chap.
And well, shall we, I feel terrible. Like I've let the side down with a lowbrow series of jokes in the intro, because actually it's a very highbrow chat. Nick's going to be listening back to this and going, no.
Why did I go on there?
Why
those two muppets?
But yeah, thank you very much to everyone who is still listening to this podcast. The feedback actually again has been fantastic. We're getting some lovely messages and things like that. So yeah, it's always nice to hear what a great job we're doing.
But yeah, do reach out with those questions as well.
I was going to say help.
We are saving some of them up, so for when they become more relevant, all become clear. But without further ado, let's crack on with the episode. So, ladies and gentlemen, Nick Dunmur.
No loud mouse click then there, Greg. That's a bit of a shame. I feel very upset. On today, right, I'm going to start that again. On today's episode, we are speaking to Nick Dunmur, who is a professional photographer, but also the business and legal advisor to AOP members. Nick, how are you doing?
I'm very well. How are you guys?
Doing all right. Greg,
where are you chatting to us today from, Nick?
I'm from my home office. Yeah, absolutely, which is located in a rural part of North Nottinghamshire, not too far from Newark and from Nottingham. So I'm kind of next to, or reasonably next to, the East Coast Main Line, which makes it dead easy to get down to London. Well, when that was the thing, I mean, clearly that's not a thing these days. And followers of my 4 seconds of a train journey, I thought I'd get that plug in, will have noticed that there haven't been any new updates on my Instagram feed for some time, probably since March the 23rd.
Disappointed.
I know, I'm sorry.
Have you thought about changing it to some kind of 4 seconds of a sat my office journey, or I don't know, is there another alternative that you could come up with? 4 seconds of watching the kettle boil.
There's going to have to be an alternative, Greg, I think, definitely. 4 seconds of a walk around the block or something.
4 seconds of lockdown, it's just a picture of a cup of tea. Yeah. I like that.
Absolutely.
So if I'm right, the AOP is relinquishing its lease. So I think you're all going to be working from home. Is this right?
Well, we've been a virtual organisation for, since lockdown started, really. It makes little sense to have something that none of us can really get into and access, and certainly somewhere that nobody else can get to in terms of members coming in to visit and all the rest of it. And we don't know how long this is going to go on for. 6 months of measures has been bandied about in the news recently. That's likely to be an optimistic estimate of how long this situation is going to last. I think it's generally acknowledged that, COVID's going to be with us, full stop. So we've just got to find a way of managing that and dealing with it, which is, partly why we're doing this the way that we're doing it, I guess, over an internet connection.
Yep. No, and also we're just too lazy to get together in person. So that's what.
Well, there's always that.
We're not. For the listeners who don't know much about the AOP, can you kind of give us a brief kind of rundown and kind of like an introduction to what it is the AOP do?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. So the AOP stands for the Association of Photographers. It's been in existence since 1968, and it was originally formed really as a reaction against a set of pretty egregious terms being touted by model agencies at the time, who wanted more money for not doing any additional work or adding anything else to the pot. And it started small. It rapidly started to gain a bit of traction, and it was formed mainly from advertising and fashion photographers originally. So it was known as AFAP for quite a while. Subsequently, the photographer membership base has broadened massively. So we've got members across all types of sectors who work in all types of genres. And I think the nature of photography has changed quite a bit as well, in that people now are working cross sector, cross genre a lot more. You guys, I'm sure, are involved in moving image production in the same way that I and many of my colleagues are as well. So that's a newer addition to our sort of tool set. In terms of what the AOP is, it's a not-for-profit trade organisation. So it's a professional association. You pay to be a member. We support, promote, educate, and inspire anybody that comes into sort of our circle in terms of, what you're reminding people what your rights are, helping you as a member with any contractual issues, any legal issues, any copyright infringement issues. We also get involved in the marketing of members through promoting their portfolios to commissioners and art buyers as well. So it's a little bit more than what you might consider a trade association to be, particularly with the marketing aspects of it and the kind of showcases and the events that we put on, even virtual ones like the Breakfast Club, which we ran the first series of from pretty much beginning of April, I think that was started, which has proved to be really, really popular. So much so that we are going to do a series 2 of that, which should be really good. So that's in the pipeline at the moment. And I think, given that we are all online now, it's really important to be able to keep a way of keeping people connected and keeping people in touch with the association, because, if you're not running physical events, how do you keep members involved and engaged? And one of the ways of doing that is, through online events that we can put out there in front of people and get people taking part in, so it's not just one way. It's not a presentation. It's an actual a webinar or event where people can join in and be part of that as well, which I think is really important too. Does that answer your question?
Very, very well. But also, as well as all the advice and the events that you guys do, you guys also, with the membership, do come things like the discount codes and the included professional indemnity insurance and all other bits that many photographers maybe don't think of, or maybe kind of let that kind of get a bit lax and all that kind of thing. So yeah, there's all sorts of extra bits as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and it's funny you should mention the professional indemnity thing, because I was talking to a potential new member earlier today who was asking what the benefits of membership were. So, which is always a good question to answer, because you kind of you have to sort of you think through physically what they are and explain them to somebody else who has no idea about it. But certainly one of the big points is that value of professional indemnity policy, which if you were to buy separately is about 180 quid's worth of cover. So you're getting that thrown into your accredited photographer membership, which that's pretty good, I think, pretty good value. And like you say, discounts for loads and loads of bits and pieces that you can access through the member dashboard. Too many for me to mention at the moment, but they're being added to all the time. And I think anything that saves photographers a few quid here and there, and it is also of a good, of a professional quality. I think that's the other thing as well. You don't want to be giving professional members discounts to things that actually professionals would never use. You want to be giving them discounts to things that they would use. So that's clearly a yardstick that needs to be measured and met each time we do something like that as well.
Sure.
You also offer different levels, don't you? Strata of membership. So you have student membership and you have full members, and so you don't have to necessarily commit straight away if people are thinking of joining. No,
that's right, Greg. Absolutely. So there are the professional memberships start with access, which is 30 quid a year, which is really, really good value. So that gets you in and part of sort of the AOP group. You'll get connected to the forums, you get access to the member dashboard and all of the kind of template letters, downloads and support and advice through there. then you can look to move up either to something like assisting photographer if you're actively working as an assistant or have worked an assistant. You can be part of that category of membership. You can equally then you could be an associate member, which is designed to include supporting professions as much as photographers. So we do have stylists, we do have hair and makeup artists involved as members at associate level, which is really good as well, because clearly photography is a team game, and it involves people from other professions as well, not just photographers, to make the whole thing happen. And then ultimately, the idea is that you would sort of look at moving yourself to accredited photographer, where you submit a portfolio that's assessed. If the quality of the work is judged to be sort of the right kind of level, and that's obviously a subjective term, whatever that might be, then you're an accredited photographer with the full set of bells and whistles that goes along with that. And then additionally, we have affiliated company membership, where companies that like what we do, like what we stand for, pay to be more closely associated with us, and that gives them access to our membership through sponsored newsletters and mail outs, and access to events and that kind of thing as well. So we've got sort of quite a large number of affiliated companies, which anybody that gets the AOP member newsletter will see at the foot of that. There's always a chunk of brands that are collected together, which is basically our affiliated companies. And we also, as far as education is concerned, because that's equally important to cater for, we have a range of accredited courses. So those are courses that teach Beyond the Lens, or the principles of Beyond the Lens in their professional practice modules, and are keen to prepare their students in as best a way they can for work in industry. So not every course is going to be wanting to do that, but it's particularly for those courses where they know that their students are looking to move on from student to working, having photography as a career, as a profession. Yeah. We'll connect with those kind of courses, have a look at how they teach, what their facilities are like, and if they meet those criteria, they become an accredited course. And alongside that, if they are an accredited course, any student studying on that course gets a free student membership. So that brings with it access to the member dashboard and all the kind of resources that are in there, discounted entry to the student awards, etc., all that kind of stuff. But that's not to say any student can also become a member. They just have to pay for that. So it's free if you're on an accredited course. You just have to pay 25 quid, I think it is, 24 quid, 25 quid, if you're not on an accredited course. And then also, finally, just to wrap up that bit, if you are a student member, when you graduate, you get a 3 years access membership on top to sort of help you bridge the gap a little bit between your education and your sort of starting out in the profession.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Beyond the Lens. Now, this is kind of like a nice segue into kind of the bulk, really, of the chat. I'd love to talk to you about Beyond the Lens and what it is, because obviously I found it very, very helpful when I was kind of first getting going. And I still dip in and out. It's actually up on the shelves over there. I still kind of dip in and out of it.
Good man.
I actually got the updated version. So do you want to kind of run through what it is? But it's basically like if there was a photographer's Bible, kind of
or
like
a manual,
a manual, yeah. Religion
sounds a little bit.
It does a little bit. Welcome to the doctrine of photography. No, yeah, it's like basically this is kind of how things work. Right.
Yeah, I mean the phrase that we use, because I know what you mean about using the word Bible. It doesn't sit quite so well, but the phrase that we use is the gold standard of professional practice. So that's what we like to think of it as. And yeah, it's a really useful collection of both fact and anecdote in terms of how people's own experiences have shaped the way that they do business as well. So it's not just a manual, in the sense that it tells you what you need to know and what you need to do. There is also stuff in there that's written from a personal perspective from a range of photographers and practitioners about their own experiences in industry and how they got to where they are. And I think that's equally important, if you're kind of starting out and you want to, it's always interesting to hear somebody else's story about the route that they took to get to a particular place in a profession like that. So, yeah, I mean, there's sections on copyright and licensing, there's sections on contract, there's sections on working in advertising, in editorial, licensing stock, what paperwork you need. I mean, the whole gamut of professional practice is covered in that. And
sorry to jump in. What I would love to start off by talking about is, we as photographers, I don't think many of us have done it in probably a very long time, and we should all kind of do it as a regular kind of exercise. But it really does help when you're kind of getting going, and for the people starting out, is your cost of doing business. When people say, "Oh, how much should I charge?" you kind of go, "Well, how much does it cost you to run your business day to day?" And people go, "Well, I don't know, never done it." So Beyond the Lens goes into, it basically starts off with this, right? And how you can, start to kind of ascertain what day rate you should be charging. The higher the overheads, probably the higher the day rate.
It's also useful actually to have now, because more than ever, because with a lot of photographers who are not necessarily getting the same income streams that they were getting before, but have still got the same costs going out. Although I know that AOP actually did a fee holiday during the first part of lockdown, which was very well received. But most photographers still have those outgoings. They'll still be paying for their studio. They'll still be paying for their overheads. And if you know your cost of doing business, then you have an idea of where you stand financially. But sorry, carry on with where you were going.
No, that was the point.
It's surprising. Well, yeah, I mean, it is surprising how there are still quite a lot of people who are shooting professionally who don't know what their break even is, for example. So if you don't know what the costs of doing business are, what it actually costs you to pick up a camera, go out, make some work, process it, upload it, and run that business. If you don't know what that's costing you, you're in no position to negotiate a fee that's meaningful, and to make a sustainable business from it. And that's really the key. One of the tools that we built relatively recently has been a spreadsheet that allows somebody that's got no experience, no expertise, to put in a lot of the overheads that they will inevitably come up against, such as purchase of equipment, insurance, maybe an office rental or a studio rental, as well as their own personal expenditure, because obviously, you still got to buy food, you might have to pay for a mortgage or rent, or, there are going to be other elements which you're going to need to fund from whatever you do to make money. So we built a spreadsheet that's a free download from the AOP's website that's basically a starting day rate calculator, which allows you to plug in all of these numbers. It totals them all up for you, and then depending on the other variable, which is how many days a week you think you can actually earn money. And of course, for a lot of people, that's another bit of thinking that they maybe haven't devoted enough time to, because the temptation is to think, well, I can shoot 5 days a week. Well, as you two both know, that's far from being the reality, because that doesn't take into account any element of pre-production, post-production, marketing, admin, business expenditure, holidays, etc., etc. So once you've taken all of that stuff into account, I mean, you're lucky over the course of a year, and I'm talking of a normal year, not 2020, which is a COVID year. So clearly, that's had that's really upended everything anyway. But in a normal year, in say advertising, you might be lucky to shoot properly 3 or 4 times a month, maybe. In terms of earning money, and the rest of it is pre-production. It's leading up to that. It's post-production. You may or may not be, or depending on what the agreement was, you may or may not be getting paid for that. So suddenly that becomes a much more difficult thing to manage, both in terms of cash flow, but in terms of knowing where your profit sits and what your break even, and why it's really, really important to know what your break even is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think a lot of young photographers who are starting out kind of probably kind of fall into the trap where they end up working all the time or staying incredibly busy but getting paid small amounts, and then feeling like, this is great, I'm busy, I'm in demand, I'm shooting all the time.
Yeah.
And then find it very difficult when they realize actually it's not sustainable to be working at that rate, to turn it around and say, well, how do I actually just not be working 7 days a week because my life balance is out of whack? How do I figure out how to, because, on these rates, I'm not earning enough to be able to work less than that. And that's when the reality hits, that photographers have to charge a certain amount in order to, deal with the rest of the stuff that we deal with on our business side.
Absolutely.
People kind of fixate of like, you've got to be busy, you've got to be, and being busy is shooting. Whereas as you said, it's there's so much involved in pre-production, in post-production, in marketing, and all the other sides of things that need to be taken care of to run a business successfully. And people don't always take that into account at the beginning, partly because it's unsexy and partly because it's just something that people don't necessarily think about when they think about becoming a photographer.
No, I think you're right. And I mean, that the way that I look on it is that if you're a professional, you run a business first and you're a photographer second, and you need to, if the business doesn't make a profit and doesn't pay you a wage and doesn't support you and your family and whatever else you want to do with it, then you haven't really got a business. I think that, the part of being a professional is that, you're able to not only repeat on demand what a client asks of you, so you're able to turn up regardless of what the circumstances are, and you can deliver to the brief that the client set you. And but it's also you're looking after the industry as a whole. You're not undercutting anybody to the extent that you're shafting them and shooting them in the foot. And for some people, if they're starting out, a couple of £100 a day sounds like a really good deal, but actually that might be less than half of what you need to actually cover all of your costs. And if you've never done those sums, how will you know?
Often you can end up kind of spiraling with that, where you won't see immediately that the profit that you're losing, what you should be charging. It's just that 6 months down the line, you're still pedaling away and wondering why it's not quite working, why you can't quite afford the lifestyle you think you should be living or anything like that. So I think the danger, and to go back to what I was saying earlier, I feel like there's a lot of people fall into that trap because it's not immediately apparent unless you sit down and you do something like this. You create a business plan, you actually do your cost of doing business. It's one of those things I always try and say to people when they're starting out. So I didn't realize that the AOP had that spreadsheet, but that's a fantastic resource. We'll obviously put a link to that in the show notes, because that'd be a great thing for especially now when people have got time on their hands to actually sit down and do some number crunching.
Yeah, absolutely. And the important thing to remember with that as well is that it's titled a starting day rate calculator, because we know clearly that that there are other factors that influence how much somebody might be able to charge. The level of experience that you've got, the niche that you work in, whether you are particularly sought after by a client or an agency or whatever it might be. There's clearly other elements that are going to be added to that, which is why it's a starting figure. It's the figure below which, if you take a job below that figure, you're basically losing money. That's the kind of that was the purpose of developing it and naming it as that, was that this is your bottom line, basically. By all means, try and make it more, because you're going to be into a profit scenario and you're going to be able to do more things. You'll be able to reinvest in your business. You won't need to shoot for as many days necessarily to cover all the costs of doing business. But if you don't know those numbers from the word go, yeah, you're going to be in trouble, as you say, definitely. And also, I mean, the other point to consider, I think, which is important, is that I think, and I think this has changed. I think over the past few years, is that people are now generally more likely to sort of look out for each other collectively as a profession. I think in sort of previous times, it was much more cutthroat, and people wouldn't think twice maybe about undercutting somebody and not really thinking about the long-term effects of that. But we are at a bit of a sort of, I don't know, not a crunch point necessarily, but as we know, there is so much supply out there of photography, of what you might call professional photography, and it's very easy to become a professional photographer. There are no barriers to entry, and on the one hand, that's great. That's as it should be, because you want to be able to. There's that sort of word that gets bandied around, democratize the whole process, and allow anybody that's got the inclination and the creativity to have a go at that, that's to be applauded. The problem is when people don't take the time to understand the business and how it's set up and how it works, and clients can sometimes use that against you. If somebody is suddenly used to paying £200 a day for a shoot and they think that's the norm, then that suddenly scuppers everybody else who knows that they have to be charging at least £500 or £600 a day to break even, to cover their costs of doing business, because they know, as we've said, they can only shoot a couple of days that week, that everything else is pre and post prod, and everything, just fills their time basically. You can't do 5 days a week, 52 weeks of the year. It's simply impossible to do.
That's I mean, another aspect though that I find is going to be really helpful for a lot of people, aside from the cost of doing business that Beyond the Lens goes into, is contracts, and also kind of the terminology that some people are not going to be necessarily immediately familiar with if they haven't studied law. Contracts are one of those things that I think a lot of people seem to overlook. And again, I wonder if, a bit like cost of doing business, people are almost a bit scared of tackling it because it seems, it's a side of the business I don't want to deal with. I'm a creative. I don't really want to have to be thinking about all this legal mumbo jumbo. And of course, you have to be focused on it, because it can really, trap you and trip you up. And there was you were on a sorry to refer to this, but you were on a podcast actually earlier on in lockdown. I was listening to earlier with Gabrielle Matola, Stranger Curiosity. She had a great round table, and if anyone hasn't had a listen to that, again, we'll link to that in the show notes. I thought that was a really interesting episode. And Sky Trailer, the photography agent, was on there, and she commented that recently she'd been coming across a lot of photographers that, since the pandemic have been trying to license work, and then discovering that they're not able to license the work because they'd signed this contract with whatever magazine or provider that they were producing the images for, and they hadn't realized at the time that they might have taken an exclusivity deal or something in perpetuity, and they'd not necessarily understood the language itself. So there are sections in Beyond the Lens that cover that as well? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I mean, it's a fundamental tenet of running a business, is that you're going to have to deal with bits of paperwork, and, that's just the way it is. So if, to take one step back from that, I mean, for somebody that really, really enjoys photography, and thinks that going professional is the way to kind of maximize that enjoyment of it. As I say, because you're putting it into a profession and a business setting, that becomes your sort of first responsibility, is to make sure the business is up and running properly and that it's sustainable. So actually, if somebody doesn't want or doesn't like or doesn't feel like they've got the wherewithal to want to have to deal with that aspect of it, then keep photography as a hobby. There's nothing wrong in having photography as a hobby and being an amateur, which after all means for the love of. That's what the word means. I mean, we tend to be, sometimes as professionals, I think we can be a bit sniffy about amateur photographers. It's used as a derogatory term, but as I say, it just means for the love of doing something. It's not something to be ashamed of in that sense, But going back to the matter of contracts, you're going to have to deal with people that are quite bullish, that are quite used to getting their own way, and developing a level of confidence in terms of pushing back against something that you've been offered that you feel is not to your advantage. That is part of the negotiation. That's part of the process of arriving at a point where you go, okay, you've given away this bit, I've given away this bit. I think we're more or less there. We're meeting in the middle to some degree. Let's call that a deal. You kind of metaphorically shake on it, sign on the dotted line, and that's it. And then you go and do the work, And as you say, Greg, that part of the process is something that a lot of people don't understand or don't feel that they need to get involved with. But when the reality of the situation is apparent, as Sky pointed out in that podcast, where you think, oh, great, I've got all of this work that I can do something with. And then you suddenly go back and check and find, oh, shit, I've just, signed my rights away in perpetuity, which means forever, for anybody not knowing what that phrase means. Or I've given them an exclusive license for a particularly long length of time. I didn't realize that, your hands are tied. I mean, you agreed to that contract, and it's very difficult to get out of that.
So with Beyond the Lens, there's sections on this that obviously are worth a read. And again, we will link to Beyond the Lens in the show notes, because you can purchase a copy online. Am I right?
Yes, that's right.
So it comes in a hard copy. It's worth, and there's sections in there as well which are super useful for anyone starting out who doesn't, for example, have their own contract that they might want to use. There's kind of templates that you can find, and there are things that you can use within the own. I mean, they are just stuff to be based off. They're not stuff to be used totally in verbatim, but they're very good starting points from anyone who kind of,
with the exception of the AOP terms and conditions, which you can use in as verbatim as they are, and it's worth pointing out as well that they're free to anybody to use. I mean, they're on the download section of the AOP website. We purposefully made those free to all simply because we want to encourage as many photographers as possible to protect themselves and to get off on the right foot. So if anybody out there is starting out, go to the AOP website and download a set and use those as the first bit of documentation for your business. Help yourself. That's something that we're quite happy to underwrite and provide to anybody.
Very cool.
One thing I was interested then to go from there with the contracts was, one aspect of photography, again, that does get overlooked, I think, by people sometimes starting out is the fact that you can make money from licensing images down the line. You're not just getting paid for the gig at the time, shooting for money, effectively. You are creating work which then can be resold, relicensed, reused, and it should be. It can be difficult to make it so, but it should be a factor that you take in, and a significant, not always significant, but a part of your kind of projected income or potential income.
Yeah,
is licensing work.
Well, in fact, when you think about it, actually licensing the use of your work is entirely what you do. I mean, you sell the use of something, not the unit of it, unless you're selling a limited edition print or something like that, which is a different thing, because you're selling an object which happens to have your photograph on it. You're not selling the use of that image in another media. You're simply selling the vehicle to that image. So, and licensing is something that a lot of people have difficulty wrapping their heads around. But if you think about comparing it to, say, the music industry, or to people who write books, authors, novelists, whatever, it's no different. You buy a track for 99p off iTunes or something. You're not buying that track. You're buying a license for you to listen to that track on whatever device you want to put it on. That's it. Your rights to ownership are nowhere more than a tiny little license for you as an individual. In the same way that if you buy a copy of a book, you're buying the paper and the hardboard or cardboard that goes up to make up what it is as a physical object, but you're not owning the rights to the words on the page. I mean, that gives you just the vehicle to it. So photography is no different. You sell an image, you're not actually selling the image, you're selling the use of it.
Do you think there's going to be a lot of people who are, quickly going back to what you were saying about the community feels a little less cutthroat? Do you think that's kind of a bit of a reaction because things like contracts, things like licensing, they're starting to become quite, it's becoming harder. It's becoming harder and harder. The contracts are getting harsher and harsher. The fees are dropping. Do you think that kind of community and people becoming a little bit less cutthroat because there's almost like we're all in this together, bandied together just to try and make it as well, try and stymie, is it stymie? Or just kind
stymie.
of stymie.
Yes.
There we go. Trying to stymie the kind of the inevitable march of, because I emailed you what was it, a couple of weeks ago going, I'm just not going to shoot this style of work anymore, just done.
Yeah
I had a load of contracts sent my way and I was just like, well, everyone seems to be trying to get as much for as little as possible. And there's obviously in contracts as well, not only we're talking about exclusivity and kind of the rights of agreements, but they're also indemnity. So say for example, if someone comes to you in the future and says, well, actually, the very bottom of that cigarette packet has a logo in that nobody would have seen, you then have to indemnify the client because that's in the contract.
Yeah, absolutely. It's things like that which will catch people out if you don't read it properly, and if you read it and don't understand it, then for goodness sake, get somebody to look over it who knows what to look out for in that kind of situation. Yeah. But going back to your point, Tom, is absolutely right. I mean, and I think also current circumstances have accelerated maybe a rate of change, particularly in the publishing sector. I'm talking about editorial magazine publishing here. Where there are some new contracts that are being presented to contributors, photographers, etc., which are, quite frankly, the worst that I've ever come across in terms of the level of rights that those publishers want access to, and for the same low levels of editorial rates that have been around for donkey's years. And I think as photographers, we have to shoulder a little bit of the blame for that, because in the past, we've probably been collectively over keen to kind of work to their terms because it's work, because we're getting commission, because our work's going to be seen by an audience. And that's possibly overridden. I don't want to come across as sounding like I'm beating on photographers here, but I think, we are not, we're not guilt-free in this, in this equation. We do have an element of complicity in the same way that we might have agreed to supply image libraries on their terms and suddenly realized that actually the rates we were getting less and less and less and less and less. I know that's not the whole picture, but clearly anybody that's been in the industry for sort of 20, 30 years and that has supplied stock once upon a time could make quite a good living from it, and now is lucky to get a 50th, a 100th of what they used to be earning maybe 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So, that sector of industry has changed beyond recognition. And, in the same way, I think the current, the pandemic, the circumstances that we're in, has put a lot of pressure on a lot of other businesses who are now looking to try and entrench their positions a little bit and to kind of make up some ground, which is why we're seeing, I think, some of these new contracts being presented, which are taking ever greater slices of photographers' rights away from them in perpetuity for no extra money, allowing the rights for them to sub-license the work to other people. If you're getting, I don't know what an average editorial rate is these days, but if you're being paid sort of 300-400 quid, by a fairly well-known Sunday magazine, and you're thinking, well, now they've got that. Now they practically own that work that I've just shot for them. They can do whatever they want with it, and I'm not able to relicense that. I'm not able to even necessarily use it on my own website for my own marketing and promotional purposes unless I get permission from them. And suddenly you realize, actually, I don't think this is worth it anymore, which is what you said, Tom. You just, you reach a point where you go, do you know what? I'm just not going to shoot that work anymore. If that's what the deal is, I'm going to find another way of making some money, and I'm not going to play that game anymore. And I think, we are in some way at that particular tipping point, which has been accelerated by the pandemic. I think it's put us into that position a bit quicker than we would have otherwise got there.
And just to quantify, you said they were the worst contracts you've ever seen. Now, we've got you on because you are, a very, very experienced man looking at contracts. You've seen, I don't want to put a number on it, but how long have you been in the business and legal advisor with the AOP? As long as I've known.
Well, I've been involved with the AOP for probably 15 years, I think, give or take. I took over from Gwen. A lot of you will remember Gwen Thomas, who used to be the AOP's business and legal advisor. And when she retired, it was one of those moments where people were going, well, we need to get somebody to replace Gwen, to step into her shoes. And all eyes turned to look at me. And I was like looking behind me to see who they were looking at, and then realized, oh, no, you mean me? Okay, fine, right, okay. So in that official capacity, I've been involved for probably 6-7 years doing, wearing this hat. But I've worked with Gwen since I was on the board way back in, oh God, when was it? 2009 or something like that, I think. So,
yeah,
quite a long time ago. But yeah, and I've seen, as you say, I've seen a lot of contracts and a lot of terms and conditions. I've seen contracts that will require an assignment of copyright, which is obviously, that's the ultimate kick in the teeth for a photographer. And you kind of dismiss those as being, well, clearly, one hopes nobody in their right mind would sign anything like that. But for big, respectable titles to start pushing contracts in front of their contributors and photographers that are all but copyright assignments is really bad news, and that's not sustainable. And actually, I think it's going to bite them in the bum, because I think what will happen is that, and we know anecdotally that there are a lot of people out there who are not signing these particular contracts. The level of content that is going to be supplied will go down, because all the photographers who supply good material will think, well, I know I'm able to get this. I can put this work out elsewhere. I can get these stories seen elsewhere. I will find other avenues for this, other ways of licensing this work, or other ways of getting this work commissioned, and they'll go elsewhere. So those titles, those publishers will have access to less and less and less good work, which is going to mean less and less and less readers, which is ultimately going to just, it's a one-way ticket, isn't it? It's interesting, because I was talking to somebody else who happened to mention an American publisher which was doing the opposite. They were actually offering better terms to their contributors, because they recognized actually if they were offering attractive terms, they'd be inundated with people wanting to work with them, sort of fighting over each other to shoot and to provide really good photography. And of course, that's exactly what will happen. They've suddenly got a queue of brilliant A-list photographers wanting to shoot for them, because they're offering proper fees, they're offering decent contracts, and that's going to up their game no end in terms of that their readers are going to have a field day. That it's going to be, well, this is it's going to be one way to just really secure everybody's future. The readership goes up, advertisers love that because the title's getting more traction, contributors are benefiting. It's a win-win. I can't see why other people can't see that.
Yeah, it's frustrating,
to say the least. Absolutely.
So, obviously we always try to be quite kind of, as much as we can be, upbeat. As much as we can be upbeat when we talk about the future of photography. And I think obviously to discuss licensing is interesting, because I know that the AOP have had a usage calculator on their website for a while. I've heard that it might be getting a bit of an update. Is that something that is still happening?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, you're right. The usage calculator has been there for a long time, and in a pre-internet, pre-digital world, if you can imagine such a thing, it even existed as a printed out spreadsheet just an Excel spreadsheet that people print out and would actually use and physically work out on a calculator in terms of how to get to a final figure. It is a guideline. I mean, that's the important thing to state from the off, which is why I think people sometimes miss that, the fact that it is a guideline, and also that it's aimed very much at top level advertising budgets. There are people who get those figures where you put in a base usage rate, or what might be termed your ordinary day rate, into that box, and you start adding the various components like duration, media and territory, and get a figure returned. Some people are aghast that it's returning sort of, a 6-figure sum, for example, for, I don't know, what might be a 2-year worldwide usage in a couple of media or something like that. People think that's absolutely extortionate, and there's no way their client's going to pay that. And that might be true. If you're working for a design client or a corporate client, that's not got a really big media spend, that's not an advertising agency, that's not a sort of a top 500 brand or something like that, that may be true. So one does need to approach the usage calculator with a degree of sort of, not caution necessarily, but sort of common preparedness sense. Common sense, exactly. Just assume that this is being delivered to a top level brand or advertising agency, and then look at where your client sits in relation to that. And if in the grand scheme of things, there may be sort of 50% up a sliding scale, and there's no science to this. This is a sort of something that comes with experience, and we're talking to other people about how you get to this particular point. But you can rapidly work out, where your clients sit in relation to, top level brands, for example, and peg your costs, the results of the usage calculator accordingly. But it is going to get a revamp. We are looking at ways of bringing it sort of more up to date based on what clients' needs and requests are in terms of usage and most commonly asked for packs of usage and that kind of thing. So watch this space. That is a work in progress.
Excellent. Yeah, because I think it's an excellent resource anyway for photographers. Again, anybody kind of earlier on in their career, or any real stage of your career, just to remind yourself of the potential fees on certain jobs, to give people a sense of perspective of what they could be asking, what they sometimes should be asking, and as you said, you have to have a degree of using it within context. But I think if you use that, and you use something maybe like the NUJ rates as also another kind of marking, a base point to kind of work off, you can start to kind of figure out for yourself what you think. And then with your cost of doing business, it's a case of getting all of these elements and keeping them all in mind for anybody who's kind of unsure of what they should be charging.
And the other thing that you can use, sorry, Greg, to butt in, the other thing you can use is the Getty have a usage calculator, which I appreciate is for stock as opposed to for commissioned work. But again, it's another tool that you can use to get a feel for what somebody would be paying if they were to use that image in a certain set of media and a certain territory and for a certain length of time. So I think absolutely that's the right way to do it, is to use all of those tools and then to sort of work out where you think you fit in that scenario in the grand scheme of things, where you sit as a professional. If you're a new starter, maybe you've got overhead, you've worked out the cost of doing business, you've done all that kind of groundwork. You might be starting at a lower day rate than somebody else, for example, obviously with more experience. Which brings me, one other thing that I wanted to talk about actually on that basis is that we're seeing more of a shift to people charging a creative fee as opposed to a day rate. Now, day rates are useful because it enables clients particularly to make comparisons between photographers. But the problem is that, what might take you guys 10 minutes to shoot might take somebody else who's got very little experience a day to shoot, because they don't know the ins and outs of it. If you're an experienced photographer, you've done that sort of kind of work before, you've learnt how to set the lighting up, you've learned how to control the technical aspects of what you're shooting, that can be quite easy for you. But that doesn't mean that should be any cheaper, because if the client looks at that and goes, well, that's only taken you half an hour, I'm only going to pay you half an hour for it. That's clearly bonkers. So actually couching your charging in the basis of a creative fee is a far better way of doing it, because you're not attaching a time limit to that. You're not saying I'm giving you a day's worth of my time or half an hour. I mean, nobody charges half an hour, but you know what I mean? You're not allowing the client to sort of suddenly see you in blocks of time, which makes it easier to charge a creative fee and then a usage fee. So have those two things separate.
Otherwise, you have to go through that awkward conversation where you say, well, it may have taken me 20 minutes to shoot it, but it's taken me 20 years to learn how to shoot it in 20 minutes.
Exactly, yeah, that's it.
Which sound like a bit of an arrogant prick. It's a difficult one, isn't it?
I did years ago get told to slow down on a shoot.
Yeah, exactly. And that's...
Oh, right, yeah, whoops.
Whoa, Nelly, how fast are you going?
But that's exactly the problem. Yeah, that's exactly the problem. If you're rattling through something and your client's looking at it and going, well, you've done those 10 shots, we've still got 3 hours left. How about you do another 8 shots for me for the same money? And you've suddenly created a problem for yourself, because you're trading time for money on that basis. So a day rate is useful.
Yeah, and that also goes back though to having put a proper estimate with terms and conditions together before a shoot, isn't it? It's another thing that quite often gets overlooked, actually having an agreement in place so that you don't have those awkward conversations on set where a client says, oh, I've just got this other thing that could you just possibly shoot this as well, even though it's not related to what the initial agreement was. And sometimes if you don't have anything in place, you're stuck in an awkward position where you're like, well, I could do that, but technically that's a different job and needs a different rate.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think I would encourage people to, if they're putting quotes together and they're looking at communicating how they charge and what they do for clients. I know clients are really keen to have day rates because, as I say, that enables comparisons to be made. But really, I think a day rate is more useful for us as photographers internally to know that we are covering our overheads and that we need to do 2 or 3 days over a month or 2 days a week or whatever it might be, depending on how you set your business up, to make sure all of those kind of overheads are met and that we've generated some profit for ourselves as well. So I think couching it on the basis that you charge a creative fee and a usage fee, and those are two very easy things for a client to understand. I'm paying you, here's for your creativity, and here's a separate fee for what I'm going to then use that work for. And clearly, if it's broad usage, it's going to be bigger bucks than if it's tiddly usage.
Well, that's a great thing for people to again, another great thing that they can find on the AOP website. So we'll link to that. The last thing I really wanted to kind of go into is, we were talking earlier about licensing, and obviously Google have just released this kind of Google image licensing. And I guess if we're to discuss the future of where photography is going, the idea that, potentially photographers now with social media, you've got an opportunity to build your own audience. If we are kind of breaking away from the traditional models of editorial and moving forward, then maybe the future is in kind of creating your own audiences and being able to just sell direct to consumers and direct to clients. What do you feel is kind of, obviously Google image licensing is a positive step in my eyes, of the fact that they are actually saying this is, you do your Google image search and it will come up that this image was shot by so-and-so and can be licensed, and it will take you to a place where you can then get in contact with them. Whereas previously it was very easy just to kind of rip that image off and get away with using it and probably risk getting chased down and sued for copyright, but people were willing to take that risk quite often. Do you think that there are other kind of potential what else is in line in the future of photography from a positive point of view? Optimistic.
Yeah, no, there are, and I tend to agree. I've got mixed feelings about Google as a business. Clearly, along with everybody else, there are data usage, data privacy concerns that many people will have about what Google knows about us and all the rest of it. But this licensable badge that they've got set up, which is pretty much up and running, I think, it does seem to be a positive step. The one thing that is not yet connected, and I think this is only a matter of time before Google or somebody else sort of pushes this forward as well, is making the transaction element of that easy. So you'll all have heard of blockchain as a technology for managing information, basically, which exists on lots of different sort of computers that are all linked together. And I'm not a blockchain expert. I'm not professing myself to be. So, other people will have a much better understanding of how blockchain technology works. But it is being used in photography platforms, and there are companies being set up alongside some of the copyright infringement tracking platforms like CopyTrack, for example. There's a sister company they've got called Consensum, which is a blockchain technology company, where the idea being is that you can register your work on that platform. It tracks the usage of it and then monetizes the usage of it for you. So the whole idea being that, going back to what you were saying, Greg, about sort of, removing the barriers between the sort of the creators, i.e. us, and our potential audience and who we can license the use of our work to. It might be that somebody wants to use one of your pictures in a blog for a week or two. Clearly, they're not going to want to pay or to be able to afford to pay £500 or £600, which is what you might have traditionally charged for the sort of as a level of usage for something. And it's just not worth your while charging them sort of 20 quid because, it'll cost you more than that in admin time to raise the invoice for it. But if that can all be managed automatically so that somebody clicks, on that image, clicks license, it's all done through, managed through blockchain, and then the funds are just dropped into your account automatically, suddenly that's a huge potential market for sort of managing individual small usages of creative work, whether it be, and not just photography, all sorts of creative work could be managed in that way as well. And I think there's a chap called Jaron Lanier who was a proponent initially, and this is a really interesting sort of side note, I think. Initially, he was a proponent of free. He was one of the original kind of everything on the internet should be free to all. And actually, he's come full circle now, and his latest writings and musings, which I think you can look him up online, he now realizes that actually that becomes self-defeating. If you have everything for free and nobody pays for anything, well, you end up ultimately with nobody making anything, because there's no incentive to keep producing. You need to be paid to make stuff. That's a primary motivator. And he was, I think, one of the first people to come up with the phrase micropayments, which is essentially what we're talking about with blockchain, whereby, it facilitates automatically this kind of mini micro transactions many times a day, perhaps even if you've got a lot of work available, a lot of work online, you've got sort of, it's popping up in all sorts of different platforms. This is, I am talking, some way in the future, and I don't know how fast this is likely to happen or not, or what the final thing even will look like. But that to me is where we are headed with blockchain, with the removal of some third parties. So particularly for those people that want to sell stock, want to license the use of their work for that purpose, I think that there are some real positive opportunities. You won't have to use the likes of Alamy, who have got, their rates are notoriously low compared to, and let's face it, there's only really Alamy and Getty left in the game anyway. Getty have hoovered up pretty much everybody else. Mm-hmm. And if you remove the middleman, you get to keep whatever somebody pays you. So, and it's on your terms. So if you don't want to play that game on those terms, well, you set your own terms. You license the work on your terms. Somebody will either pay you that or they won't. They'll go elsewhere if they don't like it. But suddenly you're connecting, all creators, all photographers directly with the end user, which I think is that's got to be a positive for me.
100%. I mean, that sounds like a system that we need to get sorted. Tom, get on it. You must.
I'm already on it.
By the end of the week, if you can, Tom.
Oh yeah,
yeah, that'd be helpful.
I'm done.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that would solve a lot of issues when it comes to. I mean, obviously, it would also create a few issues, but with the big one now is image usage on social media, and we've discussed this before on the podcast, where brands kind of expect a similar fee because it's just for social, but you've got 3 million, 4 million followers on your social channels versus somebody else using it for social who's got 200 followers. It's not comparable, and yet because it's on the same medium, it's deemed as, well, it should be a similar cost, but it's almost irrelevant.
No, I agree. I'd be interested on your views on this as well, because to me, usage on social media, but for some brands, is above the line. I mean, it's their only means of mainstream advertising that they're doing to a non-targeted audience. I mean, how else would you describe it? It's not just a bolt-on, which is what it used to be. In the days of social media infancy. I can see why clients would have thought, oh, we just want to use it on our Twitter account or our Facebook page or something, and they had 300 followers, and you kind of it was no big deal. But for a lot of brands, they only exist on Instagram these days.
Well, also the value of that image is targeted. With the modern algorithms, it can be targeted to their exact audience. It can be kind of put on at the right time of day to the right people who have got the right amount of disposable income. You can target it so much, compared to a billboard up on Piccadilly Circus.
Yeah,
you think, well, actually, which one is bringing in more new money and new customers?
Yeah. So here's another distinction that I think we can make particularly in terms of how online usage of work is dealt with. I think you can make the distinction between passive usage and active usage. So active usage is something that a client pays for. That's costed in a similar way to a billboard or to a digital poster or to out of home or any of those other kinds of things. Passive usage, and I think this is where sometimes the clients' requests for unreasonably long or unreasonably wide groups of usage comes from, is that if it's on their Instagram feed, they're not going to be asked to want to go down and find it and delete it after 6 months or a year. The thing is that actually 6 months to a year later, nobody's going to see it. It's going to be right down the bottom, So that's what I would call passive usage. Yes, it's still technically published, but actually, how many people are seeing it? Once in a blue moon, somebody might go through the whole feed and find that image and look at it. But and I think I think in future that's probably how we'll start to deal with this. Is if a client is actively using it, resharing it, posting it, putting it out on their channels, that's one thing. If it's just sitting there and it's not doing anything, do you know what? I don't think it's as much of an issue as we need to let it be.
No, I agree with that.
So, I mean, that seems like a really good place to start wrapping it up. And I think there's a lot of food for thought there. But before we go, Nick, we always like to do our two things, our Desert Island camera and our Desert Island book. So drum roll, please. What have you got for us this week?
Okay, so I've thought quite hard about this. Given that I'm going to be stranded for an indefinite length of time, presumably with no immediate rescue, I need something to keep me occupied.
You're stranded in perpetuity.
In perpetuity, absolutely. Thank you, Tom.
It's an exclusive stranding in perpetuity. Good
use of that word. So the book I'm going to go for is The Photographer's Playbook, which is published by Aperture. it contains in it 300 and something. I don't know exactly how many, but 300 and something assignments, 307 assignments and ideas, which I think, although I'm going to be there in perpetuity, I think by the time I've got to the 307th, I'd be ready to sort of start from number one again, and go through that. And the way that I would make this more of a challenge for myself would be that I want to pick. I don't really mind what brand, actually. I mean, I've shot a lot with Nikon, so I'll probably go with something like a Z7 and a standard prime lens. So, and that's it. As long as I can have a battery charger and a source of power or an unlimited supply of batteries, I'd be good, because I need to be able to review what I'm shooting clearly.
We did discuss last week. Yeah, we did discuss last week. There is actually a photo lab on the island.
Oh, really? Okay. So, that's all right. If there's a photo lab,
there probably is a charging point.
Okay, right. Scrub that then.
There's a Jessops on the island.
I'll go. If there's a photo lab, I'll have an indefinite supply of Ektachrome and probably just a Nikon F3 with a 50mm.
Oh wow! So there we go.
That will do. And then I can, and a light box.
Your wish is granted.
Can I have a light box, a small one?
Yes.
No, you can just have the sun and a big sheet of white paper.
That'll do. Yeah, there we go.
Brilliant.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming on today, Nick. That was a really great chat. If people want to find out more, obviously we'll link to the AOP. If people want to look at your 5 second
4 seconds
journeys,
4 seconds. Greg, 4 seconds.
I'm raising the challenge. I want you to extend it by a second. It's a spin-off. So the 4 second journeys, where can they find them?
My Instagram feed for that is @_Dunmur, which is DUNMUR. That's always been the problem with my name, is that maybe I should have just called it 4 seconds of a train journey, but they're all tagged with that anyway. So if you search on Instagram for 4 seconds of a train journey, you can find that quite easily. So yeah, that's a little project of mine that's been ongoing up until the 23rd of March or thereabouts, now temporarily on hold. But as you said right at the beginning, I'll have to think of another application for that little chunk of time.
Well, there we go. Luke, use your playbook.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, Nick, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. Really appreciate it.
No, you're welcome. It's been lovely to talk to you both. And I know this is a podcast and not a video, but I'll look forward to the time when we can meet up for real at some point in the future.
I'm hoping it won't be too long.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Look forward to
drink to that. Hey guys, and thank you so much for listening to the latest episode. If you'd like to stay in touch, there are a number of options for you to reach out. We can be emailed at info@exposenegative.com, and you can find us on the website at exposenegative.com or on Instagram at xnegative. We're pretty good at responding to DMs on there, and we're also on Twitter at exposenegative. You can find us personally on our own private accounts on Instagram. Tom is tombarnes.com, and I am just Greg Fennell. Cheers. Thanks for listening.